as I say, welcome from Men for Inclusion. Men for Inclusion was formed actually after this book was written by myself, Jill, Gary, Alvaro, and Stephen. Men for Inclusion is all about getting more men involved and active participants in D, I, and E initiatives and driving cultural change. We work with corporates through our individual membership with individual men. Please, if you read the book and you're interested, come along, join us, get involved, reach out to me, and we will look forward to welcoming you into the Men for Inclusion fold. To progress now, I'm going to pass you over to Kat. Kat is from Women on the Wharf. I'm sure will introduce herself, but she's going to help co-host this session. So Kat, over to you.
Brilliant. Many thanks, Mark. And it's a pleasure to be here today at the launch of this book, The Accidental Sexist. So my name's Kat Flower. I'm a director at KPMG. And I'm also very proud to be the co-chair of Women on the Wharf alongside Sheila Dunn from Chevron. So Women on the Wharf is all about empowering women through connecting our members, really to enable them to support each other through shared experiences, ideas, and in just increasing their own impact in the workplace. I think we have 4 sort of key pillars within Women on the Wharf. That's around networking, mentoring, careers, and education. So really supporting the members to improve their understanding and knowledge of specific areas. We've always had male allies across the different firms who support Women on the Wharf, but we're really proud when Gary, obviously one of the authors of this book, joined our steering committee. I seem to remember many years ago, feels like, Gary, meeting at the bottom of the KPMG offices in Canary Wharf and talking through you joining the steering committee. And that really helped, building an understanding and bringing men into that journey and supporting the Men for Inclusion network. To accomplish gender equality, it requires everyone to be really aware of it and to be a part of it. So in my mind, it really needs accomplices. And I think this book is a very practical handbook for men in workplace, to focus on diversity and inclusion, but what they can actually do to really make a change and become an accomplice in this journey. So thank you, Gary, Stephen and Jill, for writing this handbook and hopefully accelerating the journey towards gender equality. So now all it takes me to hand over is to Alvaro. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Kat. And yeah, good afternoon all. So I'm Alvaro and I'm currently a graduate at HSBC. And truly, likewise, it's my pleasure to be here today for the virtual book launch of The Accidental Sexist. I think likewise, I'm just always keen to hear other people's experiences with diversity and inclusion, just because mainly it helps me and ultimately other men understand the issues faced by an exclusive environment. And I think, being kind of generation millennial or Gen Z, I think sometimes at entry-level jobs, especially, we feel like we can't speak up. So the reason why I'm really passionate about this is mainly because I feel like, I have a voice and I need to use it, but also encourage fellow colleagues to do the same. So yeah, we want today's conversation to be with the audience. So I'll be chairing the conversation. Like Mark said, please do use the chat function for any questions you have. Mark's going to be keeping an eye on anyone that raises their hand, but if you pop any there, then I'll keep an eye to ask those questions. Otherwise, you can get yourself off mute and ask it. Just a reminder, so the Kindle version of the book is currently available on Amazon for 99p, and this is for the next 24 hours. So if you're interested and you're one of those that prefer to read ebooks, then go ahead. Otherwise, is $12.99 on paperback. And if you're coming from a company or anything like that, and you would like to buy a few books or distribute them amongst your teams, colleagues, then do get in touch. So yeah, we'll now get started. And today we're joined by 3 fantastic individuals. I feel really privileged to get to know them. So Gary, if we could start with you, could you please tell us more about you and what made you want to write this book?
Yeah, thanks, Alvaro. Hi, everyone. So yes, I'm Gary Ford. I guess I would call myself an IT professional of way too many years standing, I guess, but largely spent my time working in the financial services sector. And I guess my story for this particular subject starts about 6 years ago, when I was a managing director at JP Morgan. And I do notice one or two of my ex-JP Morgan colleagues on the call today. So welcome to you. And I was part of a small team alongside Stephen that was beginning to look at, why it was that women did not want to work in the profession I worked in. So why they did not want to become IT professionals. And even if they did, why it was that they wouldn't stick around. And it became fairly clear fairly quickly to a number of us that there were barriers to women's careers, particularly in IT, that were not particularly visible to me. And not particularly visible to a number of the men around us. So we took a decision to try and engage with more men, to try and make some of that invisible stuff visible, and to basically ask them to think about what they could do. And we turned that into a bit of a workshop, and we kind of rolled it out across all of JP Morgan's 50,000 technologists, and eventually it was adopted across the firm. And towards the end of that journey, Stephen and I started being asked whether we could share some of that experience with other organizations. So about 18 months ago, when I had left JP Morgan, COVID had come along and probably eliminated a few of my opportunities for gainful employment. I found I had a bit of time on my hands. So I thought that maybe some of that experience, I setting up a male IDOS program, talking to thousands of men about it, might be of interest to others. So luckily Stephen agreed to partner on it. And then with an incredible piece of good fortune, I'd previously met Jill at a conference. She'd done a lot of research in this area. So she very kindly agreed to join us too. So I think we started it out because we felt there was a story to tell. We hadn't seen similar stories elsewhere. And we thought that it would be interesting to others. And we thought it would be a start of a journey that we'd been through, that we had incredible amounts of enjoyment from, that we thought it might be worth others joining in on that.
Thank you for that. I think it's really interesting because a lot of the time when I was at college or university, I used to go to Waterstones and just kind of like be attracted to self-help books or books that like self-development style. So obviously, when I heard the team were writing this book, it was really exciting because diversity and inclusion is such an important topic in the workplace. So, having this guide is even better. So Jill, over to you. If you could introduce yourself and share with us more about the book. We want to know what's your headline on what the book is about. No spoiler, not too many spoilers, please.
Okay, do my best. Hello, everyone. It's really nice to see you, and also Gary and Stephen in particular. It was a pleasure. I'd actually written one academic book before this. That was a nightmare. I tore my hair. It was really difficult. Actually, writing it collaboratively was a whole lot more pleasurable and easier. So that's a good thing. So I spent 5 years at Murray Edwards College at the University of Cambridge, where I was a BI-fellow, and I led an action research project on men and inclusion. And I did that because the college had worked out that actually the very little academic research had ever been done amongst men and what men thought of workplace inclusion and the difficulties women and other groups faced. Which is kind of interesting, isn't it? That there's drawfuls of research that on women, but actually very little on men. So that's what I spent some time doing, alongside Jason Caboose, who I'm not sure has joined this call yet, but I think he might later. He was a BI-fellow also at the college and was seconded to my project to have a man working on this, and how wonderful that was. And also to Zoe Young, who I notice is here today, and she made a massive contribution to this as well. So thanks, and thanks also to everyone who supported me on the Cambridge part of the project. So since I left Cambridge last year, I've been working with this really wonderful group and also running quite a number of sessions on inclusion with organisations, which I also did through the Cambridge project, and particularly with men on how to be accomplices. I'm going to steal Kat's wonderful word. I like accomplices more than I like allies. I also like the cat tail waving in Hayley's picture there. So to answer the question, my headline on what the book is all about, I'm going to answer this in two ways. One is we as a collective, Gary, Stephen and I would just like to pass on our combined learning from over the last 5 years or so of working with men, because we believe firmly that without men, we're not going to achieve gender balance or inclusive workplaces. And so my headline is that the Accidental Sexist is a rallying cry and a how-to for men to act as accomplices and transform workplaces to be more inclusive. But more specifically, I'm going to read a little extract from the book. It is a book launch after all, but I'm extremely glad my son, who is a newsreader, isn't on this call, because I'm going to be stumbling my way through this. So, who's this handbook for? First, it's intended for men. Men who have experienced fewer barriers and men who have faced their own challenges. We want to encourage them to say, yes, there are times when I behave like an accidental sexist, but also to say, I can change that. We don't want men to feel blamed or guilty, but to recognise there may be gaps in their knowledge and there's more learning to do. We want them to feel that it's okay to be confused and uncertain and not to always know the right thing to say or do, because most of us feel like that. And when men recognise the barriers to gender inclusion, we want to provide good advice about what to do about this. It would be great if women read this book too. Women who have thrived and women who have experienced that career death by 1,000 paper cuts. We've had years of fixing women to fit in with a man-made workplace, so we know many women are already attuned to gender equality issues. Both men and women have been influenced by deep-rooted social expectations of gender roles, so both men and women can behave in accidentally sexist ways. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jill. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think your audiobook career could also take up from here. And I think that's really good, because I think what I've enjoyed the most about being part of Men for Inclusion is having that safe space to learn. And I think that's what a lot of the time we can miss, where we get quite scared of what we say or the questions we ask or we don't want to ask. And then actually, ultimately, we end up not knowing the answers, which is even worse, because in certain situations, we end up doing what we shouldn't, perhaps. I think that leads me nicely on to introducing Stephen. And the question I've got for you after you introduce yourself is, what is an accidental sexist?
Thanks, Alvaro. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Stephen Koch. My background is very similar to Gary's at heart. I'm a technologist. My background's in computer science. I've been working in IT for pretty much the entirety of my career. I got interested in diversity around 2013 as a co-sponsor for Women in Technology in London, where I was working at JP Morgan with Gary. And one of the things that we found through that group is there were very few accomplices or allies showing up to events, and we weren't even getting all of the women necessarily. So that leadership challenged Gary and I to figure out, well, how do we gauge, if we want to change the culture, we want to make it more inclusive, how do we gauge the majority? And that was really how my journey started, from just being a sponsor and coming to a few meetings to then having to think around solving what is not an easy problem to solve, which is how do you engage the rest of the organisation in something that is easy to discount as an issue for the Women's Network when it's really an issue for the whole organisation. And that kind of leads us into the definition of what an accidental sexist is, because what we started by doing was we didn't really do much research based. We started by talking to women and finding out what's their experience like, what works well for them, what doesn't work well for them. And what fell out of that was a set of behaviours that men largely were exhibiting that were making them feel uncomfortable and excluded. And some of them were, relatively simple things like not being invited to lunch or being cut out of conversations, how they were treated in meetings, but also other actions that were more, you might call benevolent sexism, where the intent was really good, but how it was applied was actually making things harder for them rather than making things easier. And so, a lot of what was striking about that is that most of what was happening was kind of relatively small things and largely not intentional. And so often these things get grouped together under unconscious bias. I personally don't really like that as a definition. And I think accidental sexism is a much better way of defining it and thinking about it. One, some of these behaviours are not unconscious, they're conscious. And they're not coming from a bad place, more like a lack of understanding. And so I think that, for me at least, when you call something unconscious bias, it's very easy to think about as, you know, someone else's problem. Whereas I think if you think of something as accidental sexism, and largely the problem, as Gary mentioned, is trying to figure out how do you make that visible to men, and then when they realise, kind of often a light bulb goes off, and that's happened to me, as I'm sure it's happened to many other people. When you realise, okay, I shouldn't be doing that, and some of this book is about kind of helping make those light bulbs go off, essentially.
Thank you for that. I think I agree, because I've worked for now 2 companies, and every time there's sort of that unconscious bias training that almost like everyone gets told to do, or, you know, suggested to do. And I feel like unconscious bias is probably such a thing of the past, because I put my hand up and say a lot of the things I am conscious of doing it, but I don't intend for it to come in in a way that it's not meant to come that way. And that's why I'm just so keen to continue to learning it from the other side of actually what should it not be, so I don't do that, rather than what it should be. And I think, we're really keen to know more about the book, and then we'll open up the floor to questions. So please do drop your questions in the chat. But for now, question for all, and if we could start with you, Gary. So on the cover it says, this is a practical guide, but a practical guide to what?
Yeah, great question, Alvaro. And I think I think maybe stress I'd like to think it's full of practical actions that people can do, but I'd like to also talk about where that came from. And although I think some of it was from ideas that Stephen, myself, Jill, and other people that had long experience in this realm knew about, a lot of it came from just the active conversations that we had. So a lot of the ideas of things that people could do directly came from our experience of talking to thousands of men and women about how they dealt with this. And I'll give one very small example. One of the really tricky things, I think, certainly if you're a male manager, is dealing with people in your team that are taking time out for family reasons. So, the most obvious example being maternity leave. And a lot of men in particular, and probably women too, make some big assumptions about what that means for a woman's career when she takes a family break. And, one small idea, and, clearly is one of those, in hindsight, you think, crikey, I should have thought of that before, was a guy who talked to us about how whenever he had someone in his team on maternity leave, he would make sure that he agreed a regular schedule of contact with that person, so they still felt engaged within the team, and obviously within the parameters of what that person felt comfortable with. But he would make sure there was regular touch points where he would keep that person well engaged, make sure that they felt that they were still included in what was happening with the team, and felt like they had a clear career opportunity to come back to throughout that time of their extended leave of absence. So it was the accumulated wisdom of lots of small kind of ideas that, as I say, thousands of men and women that we spoke to kind of brought forward into the conversation. So I think what we tried to do is distill that. And I think we've looked at it from 3 lenses: a lens about what I personally can do, a lens about what teams can do, and sometimes that may be the manager, but not always. Lots of teams have people that are the sort of culture carriers for the organization without necessarily having the special badge or hat saying that they're the leader. And then finally, a little bit about what we think companies can do that really needs kind of leaders and HR professionals to kind of get engaged and figure it out. So I've given you one small example, but I'll maybe let Jill and Stephen expand on their thoughts on this one as well.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, Jill, if we could hear more about your thoughts.
Okay, I will try and answer one specific thing, which is about building on men's motivation, the what's in it for men, and also addressing points of resistance. So this is one thing that we want the book to be practical about. And to pick up on that, addressing points of resistance, I just want to talk to you about something that I'm having a conversation about, and I know the other guys are too, all the time at the moment, which is backlash. It's the sense that there are quite a few men who think that the privileged group in this arena are now white middle class women. And so a question that we were getting always, isn't there positive discrimination going on here, has been kind of transformed a little bit. And I think that's come because of the continual emphasis on gender balance and also the language of white privilege around the Black Lives Matters movement. So there's been a little bit of a switch to people starting to say, actually, I am as a white man in particular, I am disadvantaged. There is positive discrimination going on. So we've had a look at what we've ended up saying in sessions and in live meetings with people in response to these regular questions that we get. So just to pick up on this diversity has gone too far conversation. I think we can say a few things about how we have a conversation about that. So men who feel disadvantaged by gender balance initiatives are unlikely to want to identify themselves in their organisation because it runs absolutely counter to the stated aims of that organisation. So it feels a bit like career suicide to start mentioning that actually you're not very comfortable with all of this. And of course, business psychology suggests that the anxiety and feelings about lack of control and unfairness that have when you're having a tough time, usually in the middle of the organisation, often leads to blaming external circumstances. And the noise around gender balance and racial microaggressions has really been a lightning rod, I think, for a lot of those kind of comments. That said, we have noticed in many organisations, and we talk about this in the book, that middle management find it hard to explain the reasons why senior managers are prioritising inclusion and gender balance. And that's a communication issue. And it's obviously a communication issue that is in the laps of senior managers to do more consistently, to do more loudly, to do more clearly, so that people know. It's amazing how many times we get asked kind of, well, what's the aim of diversity and inclusion when we run these sessions, which I imagine most people on this call will find a little bit kind of shocking. And of course, it is often possible or even probable that people have seen some examples of positive discrimination. So, for example, newly appointed leaders who bring in their own people with whom they feel affinity or who they've worked with before. Or things like the intention to have more diverse shortlists being translated by hiring managers into we need to appoint a woman, which leads to feelings that they're being forced into doing that. So I'm not saying all this is perception, although it'd be great to challenge the things that are myths with data, but actually there are some issues that also need addressing. So it's that kind of advice that there is in the book. And that's one of the things that I feel most proud of, actually, that we've written.
Thank you, Jill. Stephen?
One thing I would just add to both Gary and Jill's answers is we wanted the book to be very practical. Like Gary and I have been managing large teams for, unfortunately, decades. And I think a lot of the things that you see in some of the training courses you go to feel quite academic and don't necessarily have that kind of practical realism about what works and what doesn't. And so I think the other thing about the book we've tried to bring to that is it's our actual experience about working in the type of environment we've worked in with fairly large teams, what works for us, what doesn't work, and what, as Jill mentioned, what some of the problems are and what we've done, what we tried to do about those and how we tried to address them. So we tried to make it something that you can read and digest and apply in practice. And I think that for us was the most important piece, because sometimes you can read these books and understand the theory, but it's very hard to know how to actually apply in your situation. So hopefully we've helped people with that.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So I think we're going to open up the floor to questions. So again, now that you've got more of a blurb of what the book is about, a couple of spoilers, then hopefully that's triggered some questions in your head. We do have one from Laura. What one line could I use to encourage a potentially hesitant male colleague to pick up your book? and they've specified they work in STEM, in the STEM industry.
Do you want me to have a crack at that?
Go for it, Gary.
I think the conversation I usually try to have is about, do you want to be better at your job, right? And do you want to be part of a more successful team? Because I'm pretty convinced that that the drive for a more gender equal workplace will enable better performance within the organization, and specifically better performance in your team, and certainly better performance for you. I think, I mean, a few people on this call have heard me say this a number of times. The work I've done in this space is undoubtedly made me better at what I do. Where any shadow of a doubt, it's made me better at managing teams, running projects. I think it's helped my interpersonal skills. I think it's helped me with better relationships with people outside of work too. I think it's a very powerful self-development opportunity, because you do find yourself in very uncomfortable circumstances sometimes with some really difficult questions to answer, and often there's no right or wrong answer. But just putting yourself in those difficult positions. I mean, the first time I sat in a room with 50 women talking about, as the only guy, and 50 women in a room talking about, gender equality, I felt deeply uncomfortable. What the hell did I know about this subject, right? So I think you just get a little bit used to being part of those difficult conversations, and I just think it will begin to improve the way in which you operate. And there's a definite what's in it for me opportunity for anyone here, right? I'm convinced you'll be better at your job. That was not quite one line, but hopefully.
Yeah, I think Laura might have a bit of trouble. Hopefully you managed to catch
one
that.
line,
You can go back
it will
to
help
the
you get better at your job.
If you do want one line, what I would say is I love that phrase that people use, which is, if you're unconsciously including, you're unconsciously excluding. And I think that's pretty much what a lot of us are doing in the workplace most of the day. And this book will help you figure out what to do about that.
I think that was Gary, that was a better one-liner. Thank you, Stephen. We've got another question. Nima, who asked, in our business, we're planning to launch a male ally network soon. How can we encourage our male employees to join the network, and what kind of behaviors we should be looking for to gauge whether we're going in the right direction with this network or not? So I guess this refers more to the effectiveness of ERG groups, the diversity inclusion groups. Who would like to take that question? Jill?
I'm going to cop out here and say that's a better question for Anne, and particularly one of the two men who've run male ally networks in JP Morgan.
So, I mean, I think one thing you do need to do is get the group together and work out what you want that network to be. I would say from our perspective, we started out without really a lot of clear idea, and we were more doing research to try and find out, well, what are the problems in the organization? What does it say in the material out in the outside world about what's happening? What are the problems we're trying to focus on? In our case, it was more around including women in the company and making sure they were promoted and that we improved the gender balance in the organization. So I think one aspect of it is I would always try and be somewhat clear, if you can, about what you want to do with the network. And if the answer is you're not sure, then I think I would start by trying to figure out what some of the challenges are that you want to address. And often we've always found that talking to the women in the organization is a great place to start, or whatever if it's a broader network, talking about other minorities in the organization is a great place to start. And then I would also say you also need to decide kind of what you want to do with that group. So I think there is some useful work you can do broadly across the organization to try and get them to feel a bit more about the experience of the minority, and that might be kind of like infrequent events. And then what we found is you also need like a more willing group of allies who are much more actively involved. And so I think you need to think about how to engage people at different levels, like the broader population, but maybe more of mass events. And then your kind of core allies where essentially they will need to go through some sort of journey to help kind of take them from where they are to being able to understand the issues in your organisation and have the information to know how to answer those hard questions, how to have those conversations and what to do to improve the situation.
Thanks for that. I think I agree a lot, because I think initially I had started attending like panel events where a lot of people share their experiences, and I think there's so many times as as an ally or someone who's looking to learn, that you can attend these speaker events without taking away any actions. And I think that's why obviously for those that have followed Men for Inclusion so far, every 2 weeks we hold inclusionist interactions, which are more of a workshop base, where actually it's a safe space for us to come and learn and kind of be more practical about these situations. Because so far, I know personally I found it really useful to hear stories, but then actually what do you do with those stories, and how do you transfer them into a work environment or a real life environment? So thank you for that, Stephen. We've got a really good question here, which is, do you think there's a challenge of getting this message across a board level? Obviously, a number of boards this person knows are made up of middle-aged white men.
Let me try that one. We'll look at each other. Tough question, Rich. Thank you for that. So I think there is a bit of a challenge, but I think companies are waking up to, have probably done for a little while, that the fact they need to do something. The challenge is trying to help them find what it is they need to do. Clearly there's a huge body of research that's telling them that their company will be more successful, just financially, if not any other way. And I think there's definitely, it goes back to the previous question as well. I think there's definitely this thing about trying to appeal to both the logical part of people's brains and the emotional. So there's definitely the bit about it makes good business sense. And then there's the, how would you feel if these type of things were happening to your daughter, mother, sister, wife, etc. So I think there's an emotional kind of impact to it too. But I think where it possibly falls down, and actually I think the benefit of an organisation like Men for Inclusion, and actually very similar organisations, I know one or two others are represented today, like Mix, who we've worked a bit with as well, is how can they address it? And I think that's where boards struggle, because they don't really know what to do, because it does mean putting them into some very uncomfortable conversations. So I think that's why we're trying to set up the group, actually, to a large extent, because we recognise that those leadership teams of white kind of men do need some help. But you can't do it in, as I think Jill said, you can't do it in a really negative kind of blame, finger pointing way. You've got to do it in a way that makes people feel safe, feel like they can give their honest opinions, deal with some of the potentially bad stuff that can happen. Where people have, unfortunately, put in sort of discriminative kind of practices and stuff like that, and tackle that head on. So I think a lot of it's about, trying to create that safe space and enabling those leadership teams to feel like they can have some of these kind of uncomfortable conversations.
I'll just throw in something there, because Gary and Stephen have been too modest to say that they are both senior leaders. They're very high up in many organisations, have managed very big teams. So actually their voices and voices of other men like them talking to boards is very effective, more than women, kind of, because it's just the expected thing for women to go on and on about inclusion. So men talking to men has a lot more power, like it or lump it, and I frankly lump it.
Stephen, do you have anything to add on that? Or
probably the other thing I would just add is, from my experience of talking to senior leadership groups, is I definitely think they get diversity, they understand how they need to improve it. To Gary's point, I think that a lot of the types of behaviours and a lot of the benefit of what we're talking about is really to middle managers. And I think they maybe don't really understand to really the same extent what's actually happening in teams lower down the organisation. And I think it's actually some of these minor behaviours are much more prevalent than they realise. And I think that's something that these ally groups can be very helpful at addressing.
Thanks for that. I think Rich, maybe you get a copy of the book and just drop it on their board table. So, little present. We've got a really interesting question, which is more towards women, and it's, what do you hope that woman will get out of reading the book?
I guess I should pick up that one. I think the first thing to say is we're hoping that women will encourage men to get more involved in this, and it will help men that they work with to be informed around this conversation and what's in it for them. But I think the other thing I'd say is that all the work that I have done suggests that actually many women are themselves unaware that some of these career death by 1,000 cut things that happen are actually because of their gender, not because of them as individuals, because actually it's not talked about terribly much. And I'm talking about things like the authority gap, the fact that women have to prove their expertise more than men do, the fact that women are often sidelined from social networks. Many things actually that women don't realise often happen to other women. So I think it's a useful conversation to raise with women that actually some of these issues are broadly gender issues. And I think the other thing I'd say is that actually women can also be accidentally sexist. So this is not just a thing that men do, it's actually a thing that women do, because actually we're all suffused with these cultural expectations of the two binary genders, and not to mention actually all the other genders that we need to be cognizant of also. So that's our hope for women reading the book. Do you know what? I'll tell you the truth also. It's a bit like I had an advertising background, and it's a bit like whenever you advertised anything that had an audience of men or women, if you talk to women, men wouldn't be interested. So actually we've talked directly to men because we thought without doing that, without making it clear that was our target, because men are the people who are more silent in this debate, that actually men wouldn't pick up the book. So there you go, another perspective on it.
Yes, I really agree. I think sometimes I really appreciate when my colleagues who are women, they are able to educate me when I do something wrong, rather than sometimes specifically call me out, which I think being called out, it's perfectly fine. But I think for both men, women, it's just important to know how to go on about it and actually just understand that there's that education gap, which I think Michael has actually addressed in the chat. Says, if you're called out, as I was recently following a completely misunderstood comment in a chat box, it is hard to follow your suggested responses on page 122. Which there's always a desire to try to defend yourself, though this is not the right approach, which I think is good because it's just more about listening. So I don't know, Michael, you've come on camera if you want to add anything onto what you've just shared.
Yeah, I just very briefly. I mean, I think I've mentioned before, but somebody asked a question about the value of virtual versus real world meetings, and I responded to that in a very short sentence, which was, you don't have to worry about below desk attire. And somebody thought I was saying that I was naked underneath the desk, and she called me out on that. And your responses are really interesting, that you just got to say, look, I'm really sorry, that wasn't my intention. Whereas really what I wanted to say to her was, you've got the wrong end of the stick. It's like an accusatory thing. And I think it's really, really easy for a man to take that kind of accusation, oh, I was just being me, or, the comments that you've made. And I think it's really interesting the way that you've presented these. And so how hard it is, even if you've been completely misunderstood, to say, I'm really sorry, to start with that, I'm really sorry. And I think that that's a really valuable addition, though it is very hard for a lot of men to do that. So yeah, thank you. And I've really found the book fascinating. Thanks.
No, thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Sorry, Alvaro, I just want to pick up on a couple of things there that Michael points out. And one of the things that certainly Jill and I have spent a bit of time doing subsequent to writing the book is this whole thing about calling out and being called out. It is really hard. It's really hard for people to do it, and it's really hard for people to respond to it. So one of our recommendations, I'm not sure we necessarily put this in the book, but subsequently what we've tried to do is practice it. suggesting people get into sort of small teams, with their peers, with the people that, they know can watch their back, and try out doing it, try out kind of intervening, try out, what happens when it happens to you, and, what are the words you should use. Because, the more you do it, the kind of easier it becomes. So I think there's something here about, recognizing that we all will make mistakes. And therefore, how we respond to it is actually quite an important piece of our learning. And if we don't practice it, we won't be very good at it. But it will happen to us.
Yeah, just to quickly add to that, what Gary's talking about here is practicing things that are actually put in context. So practicing what you say when somebody interrupts a colleague in a meeting continually and they don't get their point out. Practicing what you say if you've got a difficult piece of feedback to deliver. Practicing what you say if somebody, you notice that they use the word, that woman doesn't have enough gravitas, or that woman doesn't have enough confidence, things we commonly hear. So we're talking about practicing things that are context dependent, not just practicing saying you are a sexist in a nicer way.
Yes, yeah, and I think one of the questions in the chat, which links to Michael sharing his experiences, what advice, I guess, besides reading the book, giving the book a read, do you have for men who want to be more active but are scared of saying or doing the wrong thing? I think you've touched on a few of those, but if you could pick one, what would that advice be? Stephen, Gary?
I mean, I think ultimately you just need to get out there. I think we're all worried about, saying the wrong thing and doing the wrong thing and using the wrong term. I think certainly one thing I've learned is that if people see you're coming with a good intent and you're trying to learn and you're trying to help, they will forgive a lot more than if you're just kind of made those comments as part of your BAU. So I think you have to make yourself uncomfortable. I don't think there's an easy answer to it. But to the point that Gary made earlier, I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. It might feel a bit difficult at the time when you're doing it, when you're talking to people you wouldn't normally talk to, or talking about a subject you're not about a bit uncomfortable with, you don't feel like you know it that well, but it will really help you learn more about that topic and become a better manager and hopefully a better colleague or better accomplice.
Thank you. We've got a really interesting question, and then I see Sebastian's got his hand up. I know by the 50 mark we'll close the session, but it's about with many current movements such as BLM and increasing awareness of trans rights, etc., how do we ensure that the issues of everyday sexism do not get left behind, especially since everyday sexism is a conversation that has been going on for a long time?
Yeah, we wrestled with this because actually some of the pushback we had when we first started talking about the fact that we were writing this book was that actually intersectionality is incredibly important, and why were we talking kind of primarily about gender? And I think actually there is a room for that conversation to keep on happening, because I think it's important that we don't just sweep past that and think that it's a done deal, because often people think that actually the women's issue is now over. But also the other side of that conversation is also important, and none of us are just one thing. So we're opening the door to one part of this conversation, but many of the things that we're suggesting about how people can behave in a more inclusive way or help people's career development processes are relevant to all underrepresented groups. And actually, of course, we're all individuals. We are all different. We deliberately don't go on about that word privilege, because actually it gets you nowhere, because we're all privileged or lack privilege in different ways. But there are relative disadvantages that come with being part of a particular population, which we still need to call out.
Thank you, Jill. Sebastian, would you like to? I know you got your hand raised.
Yeah, perfect. Can you hear me okay? I was having some technical issues earlier.
Yeah, it's slightly far, but if you, yeah.
Want me to turn the volume up? Or is that okay?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Ask a question. If not, can always.
Can you hear that? Is that any better?
Yes. Yeah. Perfect.
So I read the book before the session and would say that it's definitely really well laid out, and would say that it's a key reference guide that I'm certainly going to refer back to for the rest of my life. So to loop in 3 of the points from the introduction, I know that Jill mentioned one of them. I just wanted to offer 3 sub-points to those applicable to my situation, where as a white male, I could offer some ways that I think it could help. So one of them being Allowing most men to ignore the subject has not been a successful strategy. Men don't set out to be sexist in their approach, but the outcomes of their behaviour are often sexist. And yes, there are times where I've behaved like an accidental sexist, but this is usually through my lack of awareness and naivety. So I also know that as a 26-year-old white male who is gay and can empathise with what is like to have few role models like you and few people like you in positions to aspire to, has seen the value that focusing on inclusion and diversity conversation can bring about firsthand. The conversation has come alive at SJP as we're increasingly valuing difference, recognizing that talent isn't dictated by what someone looks like, and trying to mitigate groupthink, otherwise termed duplication, from our processes. And most importantly, I can be an ally of this agenda and accurately describe a misogynistic society in conversation more freely that perhaps a woman would be able to, recognizing that we're all on a journey. So my career could be another 40 years plus, and I'd like to try and make the system fairer if I can. Raising awareness needs to be a daily thing, not just one out of 365 days of the year when International Women's Day falls on the 8th of March.
I love that. I think, really thank you, because I think that's a clear example of, I guess, the impact that reading the book has had on you, and, the impact that it could have on all of us from having this guide with us. So I think that, there we go. Nice. I think, and I think that's the important thing. A lot of the times, like I said, we do unconscious bias trainings or whatever, and it can also seem like a tick box exercise, and you do it and it kind of goes for one ear and leaves the other, and you don't really get anything out of it. So I think, annotating and really taking on board what you're reading, it's far more important. So I think on that note, I'll pass over to Kat to close the session. And thank you all for your engagement on the chat.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Alvaro. And thank you everyone for attending. What a great turnout. I think there's a couple of things that really struck me, and actually pretty much echo what Sebastian has just said. I think there are some really easy steps that come out of the book, and that starts with building understanding. I think that's really, really important that we start doing that more and more and build that understanding. And also it's the small differences, the small things that just build up to make a big difference. I think don't be overwhelmed by the enormity of the gender equality, but actually it's just starting on those small steps. And I think, the book, in my mind, is such a great resource for anyone to read and keep rereading, and to keep close by as well, to call upon, to really share with the leadership, to get them to really better understand gender equality. And and some of the issues and the practical examples of just how to take that first step. I think that is fantastic. So it will be by my side for many, many years to come. So basically, thank you, Jill, Gary, Stephen, for writing this book and really helping to support people on that, joining that journey towards gender equality. So thank you very much. So handing back over to Mark. Thanks.
Thank you, Kat. Jill, Stephen, Gary, fantastic, brilliant. Alvaro, top man. Thank you very much. Thank you. Some final points from me, some final action points, 3 things that you can do. 1, obviously go buy the book and read it. Number 2, if you're launching or thinking about a male allies program or a male accomplices program, reach out to us. We can help. You've seen with Gary, Jill, and Stephen, we've got fantastic expertise in helping and supporting firms to roll out these programs. Reach out to us. We're here to help. If you're an individual, you're all individuals, and want to get involved and support us at an individual level, then come along and join one of our inclusionist interaction sessions on every other Tuesday night. There's one tonight. Come along and join us. Just leaves me to say thank you all. Thank you all for coming along and supporting this. You've been brilliant. Thank you for your questions. Hopefully see some of you tonight, or indeed on the rest of our journey to a better, more inclusive world. Thank you.